Conservative MPs couldn't have been more open about their fury over what happened this week in the Commons. They had expected a vote on the European Arrest Warrant and didn't get one specifically on the issue. Here are a few of them making very clear how they felt.
This is a disgraceful way of going about a very, very important matter. It is tainted with chicanery.
This motion and this approach is fundamentally underhand, and that is why there is such anger.
This is what brings this chamber into disrepair. We are not able to discuss the substance of what we stand for here, and that is wrong.
One of those who had planned to vote against the arrest warrant, given a chance, was the senior Conservative David Davis, who unexpectedly resigned as Shadow Home Secretary in the last Parliament. I asked him, following our previous discussion, whether he and a section of his parliamentary party did indeed have a sense of loyalty to convictions and principles, rather than to the national party leadership.
There's no absolute answer to that. The nearest I can get is that, yes, for a large number of Conservative MPs, the principles of government matter. I mean, this is really sort of the post-Thatcher era, when we had a rather remarkable Prime Minister who effectively turned the country round off the back of a set of principles, adherence to a fairly sort of strongly held set of principles. And since then, there have been quite a lot of people who think that we've been too managerial under governments of all sorts, and as a result they adhere more to the principle than necessarily to a particular party's view.
And that takes all kinds of different forms, doesn't it? I want to explore with you what those principles are, but it also means, doesn't it, that ministerial careers are not the automatic ambition of some people, indeed including yourself. I remember finding when you resigned from the Shadow Cabinet, Shadow Home Secretary, kind of baffling, and then realised you had other ideas of what form a political career could take.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the person who sort of understood it best in a way was Tony Benn, who turned up to speak for me, who knew precisely what I was up to, that I was actually setting out a course which would involve really almost a career of aiming to constrain government and stopping it going beyond certain tram lines. And he knew that from day one. And you were not alone. You and the entire Westminster media elite couldn't quite work it out, because they were used to calculating things in terms of cost-benefit analyses on personal career calculations, if you like. And of course, it didn't compute on that. It just didn't work at all. Now, that's why I hesitated at the beginning when you asked the question, when I said not for everybody, because, of course, there are a large number of Member of Parliament, particularly younger ones, who can see their future in a ministerial car and so on. And fine, we need that. The government won't work without it. But there are, I think, a fair number too now who think, no, my job is to pursue the interests of the country and constituents through the pursuit of an idealism, if you like, about how the country should be run.
It's interesting that you mentioned Tony Benn. I mean, he was obviously entirely different in many respects from you and some of your colleagues.
I should hope so.
I mean, he was well known as a socialist. You were well known emphatically as not being that. But I think in areas to do with democracy and accountability, there are parallels with you and some of your parliamentary colleagues and him.
Yeah. I mean, one of his great victories was a sort of victory post-mortem, if you like. And the very first thing he and I did in common was over the question of demanding that the government come to the House of Commons before they undertake what I call a discretionary war, a war where they've got a choice, really, not a reaction to, let's say, a Nazi or Soviet invasion. We both signed up to a motion, or actually a bill that he devised, which was saying the government has to do this. Now, we don't have that bill in law, but we have the understanding in the Commons that if the government wants to, let's say, attack Syria, it has to come to the House of Commons, and the House of Commons can turn it down, as indeed we did last year.
And that's why, I assume, there was so much anger earlier this week amongst some of your colleagues that the House of Commons, the preeminence, matters hugely, doesn't it, to you and others? Some people say, why are they so angry? This is a Westminster bubble story. But this is absolutely at the heart of the belief of those who share your views on this?
Oh, it's not a Westminster bubble story
No.
at all. I mean, the things that led to it are the same things that have fed UKIP, fed the SNP, a decade or so ago, fed the Liberal Party before it became part of the establishment. And there's this general feeling that the people who run the country don't understand or don't sympathise with or maybe just don't care about the things that worry people out in the country. When the government comes to the House of Commons and doesn't even give those who object to a particular policy the scope to talk about it, unless they're incredibly ingenious and weave it into a debate about other things, then that's an affront. It's an affront to the House of Commons, but through them it's an affront to the people.
Do you accept that it makes a party more difficult to lead when you have a group of MPs who aren't as ambitious to be ministers, who have deeply held principles? It makes leadership harder.
Of course it does. But, this is an interesting demonstration of quite how hypersensitive so-called political leaderships are. On this particular issue, the European Arrest Warrant, when the issue eventually got put to the House, they had a majority of about 500. There was no chance whatsoever that the government was going to lose the day. All that would happen was that a number of us would say there are reasons to worry about this. Those sorts of things could not be aired. The government essentially denied the chance to express grievances, to say this is wrong, even though they were going to win the day. Now, as you say, it's a problem for the leadership, but it's not a problem that actually challenges their control. It's just a problem that makes them have to face up to the fact they might be wrong.
David Davis on the Conservative Bennites. This